Matthew 21, from verse 23 to 32. Verse 23.
Now when he came into the temple, the chief priests and elders of the people confronted him as he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority?" But Jesus answered and said to them, "I also will ask you one thing, which if you tell me, I likewise will tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, where was it from? From heaven or from men?" And they reasoned amongst themselves, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say to us, why then did you not believe him? But if we say from men, we fear the multitude, for all count John as a prophet." So they answered Jesus and said, "We do not know." And he said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. But what do you think? A man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, 'Son, go, work today in my vineyard.' And he answered and said, 'I will not.' For afterward he regretted it and went. Then he came to the second and said likewise. And he answered and said, 'I go, sir.' But he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father? They said to him, 'The first.' Jesus said to them, 'Assuredly I say to you that tax collectors and harlots enter the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in a way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But tax collectors and harlots believed him. And when you saw it, you did not afterward relent and believe him.'"
Anita's chosen the songs today. They're quite appropriate songs, lovely to hear them. So I thought from that we'll just go into the little thoughts that I've had. Really, I'm not taking anything really other than the context of what Jesus is saying here concerning the 2 sons. A little bit different, isn't it, from the one in Luke 15, where again a father had 2 sons, and there the oldest was the one that really was the outer, and there the youngest was the one that regretted what he'd done and then came back. But here it's roles reversed. The oldest is the one that says no first of all, and then regrets it and goes back, and then the youngest turns round after saying yes, he refuses to go. And I think one of the things that I found over recent days, I've been reading quite a number of books during the period that since March and going through, and then particularly over the last maybe 2 months, looking at some books, at life stories, and then looking at some of the scriptures. I've been in the Old Testament since retiring, and been going through. I'm in Ezekiel now, just coming up to the end of Ezekiel. But there you see how, well, I don't know, how stubborn the human heart can be, how reluctant, how hard the human heart can be, how deceitful the heart can be. We can not only deceive our friends, we can deceive ourselves. We can fool ourselves sometimes. The heart can be so deceitful. But thankfully, as in the reading here, a heart that says no is a heart by the grace of God that can turn around and say yes. And I was taken aback really by just coming across one chapter that I was well acquainted with in one sense, in the book of Jeremiah, and looking there at the words of the shortest of the chapters in Jeremiah, actually, chapter 46. And suddenly all these different thoughts began to spring, or reminders of God's servants in the Old Testament especially, that first said no, but then regretted it and said yes. And it'd be surprising the number of characters that you come across. I've just touched upon 1 or 2, and they've got all different reasons for why they said no. Jonah's reason for saying no was not that he was frightened of the king of Nineveh. He knew exactly what God would do if he went and preached in Nineveh, that God would forgive them. And Jonah didn't want that to happen. They deserved both barrels. And they were a people that he had no wish to go to at all, simply because he knew if he preached, he must have been a good preacher, man. Well, does the Lord speak of him, didn't it? That speaking of himself, a greater than Jonah is you. That would seem to suggest that Jonah is possibly the finest of all the preachers in the Old Testament. If Solomon's the wisest and a greater than Solomon is here, and with Abraham, if a greater than Abraham is here, whose faith was tested in the ways that it was, then for Jonah, his test was his preaching. But his hang-up was this: why do you want me? I don't want to go to them. Send me to someone else. And so we look at different ones. Moses is the first one that sprung to mind for me. Exodus chapter 3 and chapter 4. And he's given this great, great commission to go down into Egypt. And he gives two reasons for not going. And he struggles with this issue, or these issues that he has. The first thing he has, I suppose in one sense, is the one that springs to mind for many a person that is put in a position where perhaps you feel either God is leading you there, or maybe circumstances is preventing you going anywhere else, and that's what you've got to do at this present time. And Moses comes up with an answer of saying no, but in a roundabout way. And he says, but they won't listen to me. Now, he's not talking about Pharaoh. The Hebrews writer tells us that he had no fear of Pharaoh at all, which is astonishing, really, when you think of it, that he knew that he was wanted dead or alive. You know, it was that type of thing for Moses. His fear was not Pharaoh. He had no concerns regarding that. No doubt there was anxieties of standing before the emperor or the Pharaoh when he came to meet him. But the Bible is quite clear that he had no fear going back to Egypt to face Pharaoh. His fear was this: his own people. A prophet is not without honor, say it, in his own country. And God called Moses to go back to his own people. And he struggled with that. But they won't listen to me. And then he throws in this other little thing that he uses as a further argument. Surely you've got someone better, more suited, more qualified, that fits the bill. And he uses this thing about language. Some commentaries say that he had a speech impediment. That doesn't make sense with what Stephen said concerning him in the book of Acts. He said he was a man of proven word and deed. And so it would seem to deny that, although it would seem to imply it in the readings that we have. It would suggest that that is the problem that he had, but that doesn't make sense to what the New Testament says about him. He was a man both mighty in word and in deed. That doesn't make sense, does it? So it could be that he was not au fait, he was not acquainted with the language of the Jews. Perhaps he would say something and it would mean something else. How often have I struggled with that? Something, you go to say something and it's completely the wrong thing to say at that particular time. And so Moses is struggling, whatever the problem was, but he throws in this other one then. He says, look, surely there's someone more suited, someone better than me that can do this. Now that's a thing that we do often when God speaks to us. That's another one of the things that we put. They won't listen to me, and then the other thing that goes with it, I'm not good enough to go in there. I don't have the talent to go in there. And so we have this argument that goes on inside, but there's an overriding argument that God gives to him. He says, Moses, whatever the problem is, I'll be with you. And that's the assurance that Moses goes with. And it's a struggle that he has to overcome, and it's the assurance of those words, I will be with you. And then God said to him, I'll give you 3 signs to show that I'm with you. And it must have been a fascinating thing when he came to the elders of Israel down in Egypt, and he came to them and he showed these different things. watch this now. And he gets his stick and he goes, and it turns into a snake. And he picks it up by the tail and then it turns back into the rod again. Then he said, watch this one now, watch this one. Sticks his hand under his jacket, brings it out, and it's all leprous. What do you think of that? You know, you just, it must have been an amazing situation to be in, to see that. But thankfully God was able to override. He that once said no regrets it and now says yes. And so very often we make decisions in life where we draw back. And there's a penalty to pay sometimes for drawing back. You make no mistake about it. I was thinking back in my own life, and I can think of one particular thing where I felt that God was speaking to me many, many years ago. And literally, I can't remember if it was a dream or whatever it was. I'll call it a dream. But I can remember being told there was so much activity going on around me, and there was a flight of steps that were going up. That way, then that way, up onto a highway, onto a road. And across it were all cobwebs. Now, I always get worried when people talk to me about dreams and they get very, very complicated in their explanations of it. Dreams are never complicated. The cobwebs, what do they tell you? You haven't gone this way before. There's cobwebs across it. Now what I want you to do is stand there. And I can remember feeling a hand coming down behind me. You stand there. You don't go anywhere else. But because of the pressures of standing there, what that meant to me, I can remember quite clearly saying, Lord, I don't want to go there. And there's a price that you pay for that then. So we make decisions, and they're important decisions. And we can say yes, and all is well. We can say no. And I can't say that God is forsaken. I don't mean that. I'm not talking about that now. I'm talking about how sometimes the Lord will put things in front of you, and you make decisions about them, and they're negative decisions, and you draw back. And there's a price you pay. Now that price I paid could show itself in many ways, I suppose. But I'm conscious of it even now, nearly 30, 40 years later. Still aware of it. Mm-hmm. And yet, in that time, I've seen lovely things go on in my life. Mm-hmm. Lovely things go on in my life. I can point to various areas in my life. I can point to periods after that when I would have to say, probably the happiest days of my life ever. It's a strange thing, isn't it, when we say no. That sometimes we can lose out. But thankfully for Moses, there was a cop-out really in one sense, or loss for him really. Because his argument was there's someone better, and so the Lord said, okay, I'll be merciful to you. I'll let Aaron come in. And some of the things that Aaron had, Moses lost. They should have been things that he was doing, not what Aaron was doing. So that's Moses. But he said yes after. And look at what God achieved through it. Then we come to Jeremiah. Now he uses a different excuse altogether. Jeremiah chapter 1. You could argue, I suppose, if we look at it in this day and age that we're looking at, with Moses at 80, he's too old. We could use that, couldn't it? I'm too old for that now. And sometimes it's legitimate, sometimes it's not legitimate, sometimes it's just an excuse. But Jeremiah's argument is this: I'm too young. I don't have the experience. Which is a little bit of what Moses was saying, really. Want to get someone else, and someone more suited. But we have that argument that comes into the picture now. Where Jeremiah said, but I'm just too young. And it's quite clear that he, possibly Joshua and Ezekiel, had the same insecurities in their own heart. Look at in that chapter, then look at Joshua chapter 1, then look at Ezekiel, where Ezekiel is challenged, and you'll see the fears that they had. For the Lord said to them, be brave, be strong. Why say that if he wasn't being brave and strong? Doesn't make sense. Sometimes we talk about things that when something comes in from nowhere and you say it, it's absolutely no relevance at all to the conversation. God's not like that. Everything he says is relevant. And so he speaks to Joshua, he speaks to Jeremiah. They're worried about what happens in front of them. Jeremiah is no doubt worried about the looks that he would get. If looks could kill. If looks could kill. Ezekiel had exactly the same promises. He was wishing to go to a people that couldn't speak his language. But the Lord said to him, no, I'm sending you to a people that can speak your language. But don't you be afraid of them, man. I'll make you strong. I'll make your forehead strong, that you'll be adamant before them. Not arrogant, but adamant. And so we have these battles that go on. And too young. And then we have a lady that crops up. And her name is Esther. And Esther has a problem. Because her guardian has come to speak to her. And her people, the people of Israel, are in a desperate situation where they need a representation or someone that will speak for them before the king. And so Esther is there and she's lapping up life. Everything, as David Jason would say in Fools and Horses, kushti. Everything was perfect. Life was easy. There were no problems for her. And then Mordecai comes and speaks to her. She's his guardian. He's a godly man. He's a lovely man. And he says, Esther, you need to go and stand before the king. But that's not palace protocol. You don't do that. But he says, you go and stand before the king. And you speak on behalf of your people. And Esther brings in excuses, reasons why it's too dangerous. This is against all protocol. And so it's too dangerous for me. And if I keep my silence, the benefit of that is that I'll be safe, you will be safe, our family will be safe. Never mind the others. That doesn't come into the conversation. So she uses two fronts. It's against protocol. It's not what is usually done. How often has a work of God been criticized for that reason alone? It's been done like it hasn't been done before. It should always be done like former days. And former days is a very formative time. We don't want to kick out the baby with the bathwater. We don't want to do that. We don't want to make that mistake. But sometimes protocol has to be crossed. That doesn't mean going against the word of God. It just means doing it God's way at that particular time. That's all it means. Protocol is different. And I'm quite comfortable as I am. And so he turns to her, and you would assume it's with barbed words that he speaks to her, but then he finishes it off in such a lovely way. He turns to her and says, listen now, you need to learn one or two things. First and foremost, if you choose not to speak before the king, you will not be safe. Neither will your family. So he tries to argue that point with her. You will not be safe, nor your family will be safe. And it's barbed, isn't it, the way he says it? But then he brings this round in such a warm way. Esther, it could be that you were born for such a day as this. This could be the reason for your whole life. And she comes through. Isn't it strange, the battles, the reasons that we give? I don't like those people. They irritate me. They just don't look my type. This is Jonah's argument. Better to give them both barrels. Better for the judgment of God to lay upon them rather than the grace of God. Moses says, I forgot what he said now, maybe not. His people wouldn't listen to him. Remember Gwynfor, the Crusaders? Who could ever? They broke the mold when Gwynfor left this world. When he was in Crusaders. Who can ever forget what Prakash said? Prakash came from India as a mission. And he said, who can ever forget what Prakash said? And you're looking at him and he's up front and his eyes are telling you. And he's honest and he says, oh, I can't remember what he said. he was a corker a lot of times, wasn't he? He wouldn't have swapped him for the world. And so we have Jeremiah. And Jeremiah says, but I'm too young. Esther says, I'm better off here, I'm safer here. Then we come to this other one that started all the thoughts going. He's first mentioned in chapter 35 of Jeremiah, quite an obscure chapter really. And the other chapter, chapter 46, is even more obscure. Or 36 and 45, sorry. It's even more obscure. But there's a man by the name of Barak. And Barak is a friend of this prophet, Jeremiah. And at the time, Jeremiah is in prison. The very thing he had prayed about, not just in early days, but in later years. He prayed that God would deliver him, but he's in prison. But you know, sometimes, when you feel locked up, this is what it says, that the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah whilst he was in prison. For Jonah, the word of the Lord came unto him a second time. After he said, yes, I'll go with a willing heart, the word of the Lord came to him a second time. And down in the belly of the whale, you couldn't get more of a prison than that, could you? And there he is, set free. Well, Jeremiah is in prison. And we're told there that the Lord speaks to him yet again, and he says, Jeremiah, what I want you to do is write down all the words I've spoken to you. That's quite supernatural in itself, isn't it? You try and recall everything you've said. Quite supernatural in that regard. Yeah. And he said, I want you to write down all the words that you've spoken on my behalf, and I want you to put them down on a sheet of paper, whatever it is, and I want those words to be read out to the people in the temple. So Jeremiah is in prison. We can't do it. So he sends for his friend Barak. And Barak comes unsuspectingly into the prison. It's obvious that there's some measure of freedom for him to go. If he's to say, I'd like Barak to come and visit me, then it's obviously some sort of freedom, some liberty of some sort there that allows the door to open, that Barak, his friend, can come in. Barak, I've got a task for you. What's that? I want you to write down all the words that I've spoken. Now, whether he told him the next bit, I don't know. But his response when he hears the next bit is not what we see in chapter 36. He writes down all the words, and in chapter 36 of Jeremiah it says, and Barak went down to the temple and read all the words. Then from there, a little bit like the blind man that Neil preached on last week, it went from there to the king's counselors, that he spoke to them. And then the actual sheet that had been written out ended up before the king, not Barak, but before the king. They said to Barak, go and hide yourself. This is really going to cause problems. Now, he did all that in chapter 36. But then chapter 45 comes in later, and we hear and see the response that Barak initially gave. And it says, when he had written down all the words that Jeremiah had spoken, this is what he said, woe is me. Woe is me. I've got it written down here. Where have I put it down? I better put my glasses on. In fact, it's not even spoken literally. It's what he's thinking inside. You remember when Abraham and his wife Sarah, and the Lord said to Abraham, he said, you're going to have a son. And then Sarah, who was behind the screen, laughed. And the Lord said, why did Sarah laugh? What's your response? No, I didn't. You know, when the Lord speaks to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? I didn't laugh. Well, no, you did. And this is exactly a similar situation. It is not something that's left his lips, it's what's inside him. And this is what he says. The Lord speaks to him through Jeremiah. O Barak, you have said, woe is me. Now, I've taken this from the Living Bible. I've enough troubles already, and this only adds to them. There's a lot of problems going on here. You know, it's not a stable place that they're in. I have enough troubles already, and this adds to them. Then he throws this in. I'm low in spirit, and I'm not in a fit state to do this. I can remember when Barry Tyler retired, when he finished Crusaders, and there was that little interim period where before Roger stepped in, and I remember Pastor Cooper spoke to the four of us, Martin Rees, Roger Linton, Stephen Williams, and myself. And he said, right, what I want each of you to do, I want you to take a month of meetings so we can at least, if Roger, obviously, with the thought, if it took a month or if it took 4 months, we'll have the post-film, the youth leader type thing. So he turned to Martin, and he said to Martin, what do you think, Martin? Martin said, woe is me if I do not preach. You quoted Paul, that type of thing. It was one of those situations that you had to step into. Came to Stephen, yes, I'll do it. Came to Roger, yes, I'll do it. Came to me, no, I don't feel in a fit state for this. I felt wrecked. But that's exactly the same phrase I used, and it was a measure of disappointment, but I think in all parties that were there, that I turned around and said, no, I don't feel up to it. And that's exactly what he's doing here. I'm not in a fit state. But there's other things hidden in there as well. He's got another hidden agenda. He thinks there's an opportunity for promotion on the horizon. That's an interesting one, isn't it? If I get involved here, that door could close and I could lose everything. My dreams, my passions, the thing that I can't take my eyes off it. If I speak for you now, I could lose all that. Isn't it interesting, the excuses that we can put into things? And those are just an example of 4 or 5 people. And the stories continue through the Old Testament. But then we come into the New Testament and we read of Paul. And in closing, look at the time. 5 to 12. This is what Paul says in 4 or 5 simple words. I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision. I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision. God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace, that I might preach among the Gentiles. I've got the wrong phrase, the unsearchable riches of Christ. I know that's from Ephesians. That I might preach him amongst the Gentiles. And then this is what it says. And they glorified God in me. When you say yes to God, when we say yes, and go into it wholeheartedly, it becomes such a blessing to those around you. Because you are and you're doing what you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do. No matter how small it is, no matter how insignificant, no matter how big, it's there. We sing this song, did we? Where is it? This is the chorus that we sang. Precious Jesus, I am ready to surrender every care. Take my hand now, lead me closer. Lord, I need to meet you there. I can still see that hand in the dream, stand there. I need to meet you there. Well, how stubborn is your heart? How sweet is your heart? By the grace of God, the sweetness can be yours. Just a few thoughts about, well, how stubborn we can be sometimes, and the arguments that we lodge with our dealings with the Lord. Well, let's turn